I am so pleased and proud to be here tonight at an event organized by these three fantastic organizations. These are organizations that are on the front lines every single day fighting policies of inequality, two-tier justice systems, segregation inside Israel-Palestine, in different ways, in the courts, in the prisons, and in the case of my wonderful publisher, Andalus, by translating Arabic writing into Hebrew, and as an act of resistance, translation as an act of resistance. So thank you, Adalah, thank you, Mada, thank you, Andalus, and especially my friend and publisher, Leher, who organized this extremely unconventional book launch. I had intended to just sort of present the thesis of the book to you tonight and apply it to the context that we're in. I'm happy to talk about the book. I will talk about it a little bit. We're going to have a discussion period afterwards, and I'm happy to take your questions. But I've just written this speech, which is always dangerous for me. It's fresh off the printer at the hotel, which means I probably made all kinds of errors and will get confused while I'm speaking, so bear with me. I didn't even have time to read it over. But I wanted not to give you the standard shock doctrine speech, because I've had such an extraordinary few days here, and I want to share with you some of these experiences. I feel extraordinarily fortunate to have spent the last 2 days in Gaza. 2 days is not enough, it's ridiculous. We didn't actually believe I'd get into Gaza, which is why we only allocated 2 days, and I had to come back for this event, which I wanted to, of course. But if we'd known, we probably would have, we were just trying our luck. We didn't know it would work. Getting into Gaza is a right, as you know, that is denied to thousands and thousands of Gazans around the world who are not permitted to return to their homes, even to care and comfort aging parents, parents with terminal illnesses, to mourn or bury their loved ones. It's also a right that's denied to Israelis, including Israeli journalists who aren't allowed to enter Gaza, as you know. They're not allowed to bear witness to the destruction wrought by their own military, not allowed to show Gazans that there are Israelis who oppose the siege and the military onslaught, and simply not allowed, in the case of journalists, to do their job of reporting on what the government is doing. We know the case of Amira Haas being detained on her way out of Gaza. And this is not some little news story here that they're not allowed to report on. This is the greatest act of violence committed against the Palestinian people since the Nakba. I handed the border guard my press pass, and she's on the way out, and she saw, "What do you do?" "I'm a journalist." "What were you doing in Gaza?" I said, "There's some news there. Have you heard?" She said, "Yes, we've heard." So it's in this context that I believe that every international that comes to this region, activists, artists, but especially politicians and journalists, have a responsibility to go to Gaza, precisely because others cannot, and precisely because Gaza is slowly disappearing. It's disappearing from our view. Now, we are some of the only ones who have the power to try to make it reappear only a little bit, who can break the siege with our voices in some very small way. So I want to take advantage in that spirit of the fact that we're gathered here in this room, and I think a few people are gathered in another room nearby, and I would just like to say hello to you. I wish we could all be in the same room together. We can meet afterwards. But I want to take advantage of this gathering, this gathering that has been organized in such a special way, to bring you a few of the stories, ideas, and theories that I heard in Gaza over the past couple of days. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to start with Mohammed Surab. I met him on Monday at his beautiful farm where he grows many things, figs, olives. He also makes wonderful honey. When I met him, I was with my husband, Abi Lewis, who's traveling with me. And Mohammed was sitting in his office, second floor office in his farm, when we arrived, and he was writing in his journal. Now, some of you may recognize his name because his is a famous case, a case that's been documented by journalists and human rights organizations. But for those of you who don't know his name, let me tell you a little bit about his story. On January 16th, during the onslaught, Mohammed was driving home for lunch from his farm with his two sons to his nearby house. This is in eastern Gaza. He lives in the village of Al-Fukari. A very, very short distance, just a few kilometers. This was the middle of the day, and the Israeli military had opened up a 3-hour period when people were actually allowed on the roads. Middle of the day, 1 o'clock. As I said, he was going home for lunch. Israeli soldiers had occupied a nearby house. I saw the house. It was high, and so it made a good military base. And as he was driving, they opened fire on his car. All 3 of the men in the car, Mohammed and his 2 sons, were shot. Qassam, the oldest son, was shot in the chest. He managed to walk a few steps, then collapsed and died, right before his father's eyes. Mohammed himself was shot in the arm. His younger son, Ibrahim, was shot in the shin. Now, what's significant about this is being shot in the shin should not be a life-threatening injury. He could have lived. Mohammed begged these soldiers to bring first aid, water, anything to help his son. And he also asked them to call an ambulance, which by international law, he had every right to do. They gave him no help. In fact, Mohammed managed to call an ambulance himself on his cell phone, but it turns out that that ambulance, which did try to get there, was blocked and didn't make it there. So he sat with his son, after watching another son die, for 12 hours as he bled. And in the 12th hour, he died. Another 12 hours later, the ambulance arrived and took Mohammed himself to the hospital. Now, sitting in his office overlooking the farm, 6 months later, barely 6 months later, not yet 6 months later, Mohammed made no secret of the fact that he was trying to keep himself from going crazy, which is why he was writing in the journals. He found that writing helped. And as you know, it's hard to get paper in Gaza because of the siege. But he had managed to get a whole bunch of children's notebooks, maybe because it's possible to get children's notebooks a little more easily. So he was writing his journal in bright pink Barbie notebooks. He was confessing to Barbie his deepest torments. He had filled 6 of these Barbie notebooks in very small Arabic script.